Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video, we're going to talk about how the federal government is now jumping on the bandwagon to target short-term rentals right across the country. We're also going to talk about some protections they're putting in place for mortgage holders as we move into the next couple years. And then lastly, we're going to talk about Canada's inflation rate, what that means for the real estate market, and how I project things are going to go in the new year. Real quick before we get started, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hasan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area, and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. I also make content designed to help you make your move in and around Vancouver. So if that sounds interesting to you and you wanted to chat with me one-on-one, you can book me in the Calendly link below. But regardless, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. All right, so fresh off the heels of the provincial government coming out with the short-term rental restrictions here in BC, right when that happened, the federal government kind of looked at BC and gave them a bit of a pat on the back and said, look, we're going to be thinking of doing something as well to target these short-term rentals, specifically short-term rentals that are not following municipal or provincial policies. And exactly that just happened by the federal government. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland came out with her economic report essentially for the next couple of years. And one of the items in there is basically targeting short-term rental holders or owners that are not following municipal or provincial guidelines. And what they are suggesting is they are not going to allow these owners of properties to be able to deduct expenses from their short-term rental revenue. So when you're not able to deduct the expenses, obviously the amount of revenue you have or your net number is larger, and hence you're paying more tax. So it's kind of an interesting play, I think, by the federal government because in a couple ways, they're benefiting in a couple ways. They have the public perception against, the bad guy. And the bad guy right now, it has shifted from being immigration when it comes to the housing crisis and housing supply. Immigration was the bad guy for much of this year. Over the last few months, it's Airbnb, it's short-term rentals. So the federal government comes out and they basically say, look, we love what you did, BC, we're going to help you with that. And in doing so, we're basically, in the public eye, they're making themselves look a little bit better, but at the same time, they're ensuring that they're capturing more tax revenue. So there's a financial benefit or incentive for them here as well. So it's target the bad guy and ultimately collect more revenue. Now that's assuming that everyone is reporting their rental income, their short-term rental income. But the other thing that they're kind of doing in this process as well is they're contributing funds to any provinces, municipalities that need heightened enforcement of short-term rental restrictions. They're going to be contributing funds at the federal level. So now you have BC with their restrictions, you have the federal short-term rental restrictions. At the municipal level, I know that they are, heavily targeting and they're working on enforcement of these short-term rentals. I had someone call me from this channel mentioning that they're going through that process right now in terms of being audited by the city for short-term rental compliance and the investigations that they're doing. So again, this is kind of the bad guy. And so the federal government hops on the bandwagon like we knew they were going to do. We should find out more details exactly how that's going to look, but they're really cracking down on the short-term rentals. Now, part of the finance minister's message that she gave the other day was also in the area of mortgage relief for Canadians. And you can tell by the policy that she's been coming out with or the report that she's come out with, you get the sense that, an election may be on the horizon because a lot of this stuff doesn't come into play for the next year or two, kind of setting the stage saying, if we're reelected into office, then a lot of these things are going to come into play. But when it comes to the mortgage side of the equation, they're doing a couple things here. And the reason why they're trying to make it easier on Canadians who have mortgages are twofold. Number one, 60% of mortgages in Canada are going to renew over the next 3 years. And we've talked significantly on my channel about how, interest rate increases and hence mortgage rate increases, they really haven't affected the majority of the population. Most of the people are on a fixed rate that have mortgages right now, and even those that are on variable rates, oftentimes their payment has stayed the same essentially, just more money has gone towards interest. So all of this, rising interest rate environment for a lot of homeowners, they're not they haven't felt the pain. And both the Bank of Canada and the federal government now is looking at this, and they are basically saying, look, the next 3 years could be a challenging time. This is when we're actually going to see the effects of these rate cycles. So essentially what they're doing is they've gone to the banks and they've said, look, we're calling this a mortgage charter, and we're giving the banks direction on how to deal with these renewals. Number one, in certain instances, they are telling the banks to allow for extended amortizations. And when you extend an amortization, you keep the payment steady. You're basically paying over a longer period of time, you're paying more interest, but you keep that payment steady. They don't want this sort of, I'll call it sticker shock on Canadians as they go to renewal. The other thing as well that they're saying is at the renewal stage, for those that have insured mortgages, so those are ones where you're putting less than 20% down, if at renewal you're seeking out another lender, you will not have to undergo the stress test. And the stress test is basically where they look at your contracted rate of the mortgage, of the new mortgage, and they add 2% on top just to make sure that you're able to sustain or maintain against any further interest rate increases. So they're saying, if you switch lenders at that time, you're not going to be subject to that. In a way, this brings maybe a little bit of competitive nature to that renewal process, where your existing bank doesn't hold all the cards, because now you have a little bit more negotiating power. You can switch more easily, and again, perhaps it brings more competition in that sense. They're also saying, look, you're going to have to waive any prepayment penalties if someone is to sell their principal residence, and there are prepayment fees for the mortgage involved. We want you to waive those as well. They really want to make it easy on the homeowner. And I've mentioned several times on this channel, the provincial government, the federal government, they will always protect the homeowner across the country, because generally homeowners, we are the voters, we make up the majority, and as we head again to another election that's going to happen in the next couple of years, you can tell that the federal government, I mean, they're well behind in the polls if you're following that. So you can tell they're kind of setting the stage for, trying to win back some of this confidence in them moving forward. So there are some other changes that she's announced within this mortgage charter. I will link to the details of it in the description box below, so not to bore you. But those are basically the changes that are coming from the federal government side. When we look now at inflation, we just had the most recent inflation data come out, and basically lower than analysts expected again at 3.1%, the CPI rate. So it has come down, and it's not obviously quite at the 2% level that the Bank of Canada is targeting, but I do think it has come lower than they expected, definitely lower than what the analysts have expected. If we think of the reasons why, the upwards driver of inflation is pretty much always the same. It's mortgage, it's rent, so housing, shelter costs, and food costs. And what has brought it down, you may notice at the pumps, gas has been cheaper for the past month or so. Gas being reduced about 8% year over year. So that's really kind of brought the inflation rate down. But this is a positive sign as we look forward, because it's basically suggesting, when you look at the Bank of Canada, they've been increasing, mortgage interest costs, and I've harped about it on this channel. Many people have that when you raise rates, that's an inflationary move. But at the same time, we also have to look at it from the other angle where, housing, shelter, food, the basic necessities, if households are spending, more in this area, the discretionary spending is going to reduce, which it has. The other alternative that the Bank of Canada had was not to raise rates and watch real estate prices continue to go up, and watch Canadians do whatever they can do to basically put themselves into unaffordable situations. So, you have to pick your poison a little bit, and the Bank of Canada did just that. So I think what this is suggesting now, what most analysts are saying is, rate hikes are done. The economy has stalled, the rate hikes have been working, and it's sounding like the next move by the Bank of Canada will be a rate drop at some point next year, whether that's middle of next year or Q3, but that's definitely what the market is feeling. So, it's interesting what has happened with interest rates. I was thinking about it yesterday when we look at what happened during the pandemic, because, Bank of Canada took a lot of heat. Pandemic, comes about, and the Bank of Canada, federal government are like, wow, this is going to kill our economy. So the federal government's like, let's funnel money to everyone, serve payments, let's print cash. The bank is like, we need to drop rates considerably, right down to the floor. And the way that I kind of picture what has happened over the last few years, if you imagine yourself, driving down an icy road, and all of a sudden, you notice you're going off kilter and you're sliding on the ice at an angle towards a ditch. And that's the pandemic. A lot of people's first thought is to crank the wheel in the other direction. Now, those of us who have been driving for some time, we know that that's not the right thing to do. You're going to basically over-negotiate that, and you're going to head towards the other ditch. And that's essentially what happened with interest rates, is they cranked the wheel low, and then we started veering in the other direction. And in doing so, again, psychologically, they start cranking it in the other direction, where over the last 18 months, they raised significantly. And I'm starting to wonder now, are we going to find a place where they end up in the middle and the wheels stick? And if they manage to pull something like that off, because look, we're not going to have pandemic interest rates anymore, but if they manage to pull this all off before, again, those 60% of renewals come up, maybe they ultimately did end up doing a good job, right? They actually, did what they needed to do. They did it in relatively quick fashion. Obviously, they're going to take a lot of heat for saying rates are going to be low for a very long time, but that's how I imagine it. It's a car out of control in one direction, out of control in the other, but then finally your wheels stick, and maybe that's right in between pandemic rates and where we sit today. So that's going to be interesting to follow, but what I can tell you in my business, at least, is I've had several buyers reaching out over the last 2 or 3 weeks. People are getting prepared, a lot of sellers as well, getting market assessments done, getting prepared for next year. I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen in the real estate market next year. And if you want, you can watch my previous videos. You know that I am not a cheerleader for the market. I'm not one of those rah-rah realtors that's like, oh, it's a great time to buy, great time to sell. I'm pretty discerning about, the stuff that I put and my belief in the market. Again, I'm feeling very optimistic that the market starts picking up again. I've been extremely busy over the last 2 weeks and very fortunate. I've been actually working with a lot of you from this channel who have reached out to me. So I'm very appreciative of all of you. But when I look forward to next year, I'm seeing these catalysts. I'm seeing the governments at all levels, finally this year admitting how much of a supply crisis we have, and basically shoving every incentive they can at builders. The federal government now another $15 billion towards building affordable housing, rental housing as well. So they're just throwing everything they can. And so when you look at, some may look at it as desperate tactics, or, you're throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall. That's got to tell you something about what the future outlook is like for real estate supply. And again, when we look at immigration, when we look at demand levels, they're really trying to crank up that supply. And when that happens, when supply and demand is off kilter, as we all know here in Vancouver real estate, prices start to go up. And, as Canadians hear more and more about rate hikes being over, potentially the next move is a drop, or even if they stay steady. We saw historically when we have rates hold steady for 2 or 3 announcements, people flock back into the market because people want consistency. They want stability. They don't necessarily need the lowest rates on the planet because, again, that drives up prices. That makes things very competitive. Right now, it's a very comfortable market. I'm writing offers out there in certain cases with 7 and 8 day subject removals, like lots of time to do due diligence, taking all of our time to read the strata documents, to make sure everything's in line with the financing, making sure the bank has a chance to appraise the property. It's a comfortable environment right now, I would say, for buyers out there. Sellers that are pricing themselves correctly as well, they're seeing a lot of action. I'm seeing, especially on development sites, single family homes that are teardowns. There's a lot of appetite for these types of product, especially with the changes to the zoning around SkyTrain and multiplexes, which we've talked about a lot on this channel. I won't go down that road, but there's definitely a heavy appetite. I'm very optimistic for next year, just the way that I'm seeing things from a feet on the street perspective as a Vancouver realtor. So I wanted to thank you so much for watching this week's video. I hope you learned something. If you did, hit the like button, because what that does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can learn from it as well. And if you like this weekly real estate content, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss next week's video. And lastly, again, if you're in the Vancouver area or you're in the Fraser Valley, you want to talk to me about your real estate situation one-on-one, you can book me in the Calendly link below, or you can just send me a text, give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever is easiest for you. All my info's in the description box. Again, I want to thank you for watching this week, and I look forward to seeing you in next week's video.